Good morning. So there's going to be a little bit of audience participation because I'd like to just try to gauge who owns their own business out there, a retail business. So if I could just get a show of hands as to who has a storefront. So what type of business then would you be in? Anybody? Or retail? So you work for a retailer? Okay. I'm sorry? 7-Eleven. A 7-Eleven. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so whether you're owning the business or whether you're running the business, you work in retail. Is that correct? Most of you? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about some statistics that some of your businesses are included in this information, like a 7-Eleven, because you responded to a survey. And I'm going to give you this information and try to break it down. But I'm going to give you the big number, and so it's going to look like the sky is falling. But I don't want you to think that anything that I present is beyond your control. So my background is retail loss prevention for large corporations, and large corporations arguably have an infrastructure that allows them to combat theft, like a 7-Eleven. Sean Sporton works at 7-Eleven and has great response in terms of how they deal with theft and with robberies and that type of thing. But some businesses don't have that. And so what I want to do is break it down and give you kind of the root cause of why some of this stuff is happening, and then work our way back up as to some of the solutions that worked with the larger corporations. So you don't necessarily have to spend money with research and development, but you'll be able to at least take advantage of the findings that some of these larger retailers have already looked at. So any association, whether it's Retail Council of Canada, whether it's the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, the Canadian Chain Drugstore Association, these associations have multiple purposes. First and foremost, they're an advocacy group. They work on behalf of the interests of the community that they serve. So in this case, retail, whether it's a convenience store association, they work at looking at your best interests to make sure that you have a healthy business. They don't necessarily have the expertise at running the business, which you may have found out, is that operationally you may call your association and they don't have an answer operationally, or they can't share that information because the Competition Act says that you can't do that as an association. So you can't get together and collaborate on how you're going to address a certain vendor. You can't do that. And so they're a little bit restrictive, but first and foremost, they're an advocacy group. They provide education and events and networking opportunities as a value add, but primarily it's advocacy. So cross-border shopping and how that affects Canadian retailers, that's an issue. And so that's something that the associations will get together and say, wait a minute, let's not have the amount for cross-border shopping go up to $800 or $2,000 without taxes, because that puts me at a competitive disadvantage with a retailer that is within an hour and a half of my own business. And so they'll look at something like that and they'll argue on your behalf. The one thing that they do is that they also provide some reports, some research and that type of thing, which we'll get into just a minute. So let me talk about independent businesses, because I think you'll learn about this life cycle of an independent business. You'll learn where you're at, even if you're representing a business that is attached to a larger chain. And I put this slide together as a result of a Retail West conference where somebody talked about how they grew their independent business and how they ended up with a shrinkage rate. So shrinkage, I'll explain, is the difference between your book value and your physical inventory. So it's your losses. So I'll refer to it as shrinkage for the rest of the presentation, but it's your inventory losses. Doesn't include cash theft, doesn't include some other things. But this retailer basically talked about her life cycle and said that she had this special product. It was actually, she's an arts and crafts vendor in where the ferry goes in and out for Nanaimo on the north side of Vancouver. I'm not sure if it's called Golden Horseshoe or something like that. The Golden Shoe Bay, Horseshoe Bay. Yes. So she's around that area. And she started by having this offering, and then she would sell to her family and friends. And this is normally what happens with an independent business. And then, lo and behold, then the neighbors, the family and friends all start coming in. Then they believe that they need a storefront, so they open something up, and usually it's really cheap rent, and it's a very small storefront. And then they start to get this community of transient customers that come through, and so not necessarily recognizable by the person. But what happens from an independent retailer standpoint is I know and I trust everybody who comes in because they're family, they're friends, they're neighbors. Where that level of distrust should come in is really questionable as to at what point do you start to suspect. And you don't want to put CCTV or security cameras up when you're selling to your friends and family. Like if my grandfather came into the store, I wouldn't want a security camera to watch what he's doing. So at what point do you look at it and say, I need to protect my business is still a question that's out there. But arguably through this life cycle, there becomes this transient population that comes in, and these are unknown people to you. And that's when you start to realize that you have shrinkage. When you take your inventory and when you see that it's detrimental to the bottom line, and it becomes an issue. So shrinkage in terms of the in-scope, what it's measuring is the inventory difference, what I think I have and what I have. What it doesn't measure, as I said, is cash loss out of the cash register because that's not considered inventory. Insurable claims, and so if you get a larger retailer that has a robbery and it's a $300,000 robbery, their insurance provider will work that out and replenish them. And so it's out of scope. It actually doesn't get covered in shrink. The reason I'm telling you this is when you look at the number, when I show you the number, understand that insurable claims, robberies, break-ins, those type of things are not included in the number. Chargebacks from fraudulent transactions. So about 6-7 years ago, we in Canada experienced something that the US is experiencing right now, and that is chip and pin technology where the hardware was required by the retailer, otherwise you'd be charged back for any type of dispute. US is going through that now, and they're having some major issues with that because they were very slow to chip and pin, and they're very slow on the hardware. There's not many retailers, especially smaller retailers, that have the hardware, and so they're being charged back by the banks, and they're facing the consequences of that through the bottom line is being affected considerably. Online losses and markdowns, those type of things are not included, and I'll explain the online piece in a little bit. So the method in which we try to get the information is anonymous, and we'll be engaging in a study that was mentioned on the economic impact of retail crime. That'll be done in coordination with about 4 universities, primarily with York University in Toronto. And that is going to be looking at the total impact, because what I'm talking about right here and what you and I can talk about is the fact that we're on our own in this. So when I talk about the shrinkage and what it is, this is what retailers are dealing with. What we're not covering is what the impact is to law enforcement if they do show up, what the impact is with the court's time if they do get involved, and what the impact is with this underground economy that takes place because people are buying out of condos in downtown Vancouver and they're not coming to your store. So what is the true impact there? We'll be talking a little bit more about that. It's all at retail accounting, so there's 2 ways of looking at your shrinkage. One is retail dollars, so if I buy something for $7, sell it for 10, and I lose it, I lose 10. So we're doing that for a specific reason. That's to keep everybody on par. You actually only lose 7. That's what you can charge to your P&L. And then the annual adjustment to the books. So here's the results. There was no drum roll. I'll tell you that the average shrink in Canada at retail is 1.4%. Very similar to the US, but on a smaller scale, about 1/10 of the retail economy. So we're $4.6 billion. $4.6 billion is taking into consideration that we have about $400 billion $331 billion in retail sales. That takes auto out, and we try to take auto out to get a true picture because otherwise it'll misrepresent the number a little bit. So that's what the shrinkage number is 1.4% and 4.6 billion. And you can see the scale at the very top line is a small amount of 1.04 to a larger 1.75. That was the scale. The breakdown, and a lot of retailers that have a loss prevention department, they like to see what the breakdown is of that theft. So if I lose $10,000 in my store, where did it go? Is it all customers? Is it employees? Are they errors that are made? This is the pie, if you will. It doesn't look like a pie, but this is the pie. So 49%, and let me just qualify this for a second. These numbers are based on the expert opinion of loss prevention professionals who responded. So you would never be able to scientifically prove this unless you had no losses, but you had 1,000 incidents, and you took those incidents and you categorize them. So that would be the only way you'd be able to do it scientifically. Otherwise, this is people's opinion. 49% is customers, 31% is my employees. It's a shameful figure, 31%, but we have to be realistic when we're trying to respond to retail fraud, retail theft. We have to understand that employees do steal. Administrative errors is 13%, and vendor fraud is 6.25%. Vendor fraud is a category that you'll be interested in. It's come up in the last 5 or 6 years. It's never really been, over my 30 years in retail, it's never really been something that retailers say, I've been hit so bad at my back door by my local delivery person who did not put a pallet on my shipping dock and kept it in his truck so he could drive down the street and sell it to a convenience store for less cost. That's come up so much that it's actually hit the scale now that this is happening on a very large basis. So, 6.25% of a $4.6 billion problem. I'm going to break the numbers down just a little bit. And the reason I want to explain this is I want you to understand what that means in terms of sheer numbers. We've never really been able to say how many customers steal and get away with it. But if you know how many customers, or the ones that get arrested, how much they steal, and what the shrinkage is, you can factor these numbers into the total calculation, and that number is $175. So may not be a smaller retailer, but you have to think the people who responded to this are Hudson's Bay Company, Nordstrom, Sears, Walmart, Best Buy, a lot of retailers who have, and I don't know, I'm just giving you an example, I don't know that they responded because it was anonymous, but those are kind of the categories that we're talking about. So $175 will include, the $5 and $6 at a local convenience store to the $1,000 at a luxury retailer. It's the average. It's $175. And if $175 is the average and 49% of 4.6 billion is customers, then that's 2.275 billion that customers steal. And if on average it's $175, it's 13 million undetected incidents of theft. Undetected incidents of theft. So in Surrey, in the last 6 months, there have been 1,300 shoplifter cases. So around 1,300, 1,250, 1,300, somewhere around there, that have been prosecuted. You don't prosecute all the ones that are stealing. You prosecute only the ones that you catch. And that is few and far between, unfortunately. So 13 million incidents of customer theft. The reason we're going to talk about this is we're going to try to figure out from a root cause standpoint what you can do about it. On average, employees steal $2,500, $2,562. And the reason that this number is so much higher is because when you work an investigation, for some of you, you probably outsource your loss prevention when you have an internal, or you call the police and they'll actively work that investigation. And in BC, your laws are a little bit different. You have a favorable system in terms of how the Crown attorneys work. And Peter Stabler's probably one of the best crowns in the country. I don't know if he's retired yet. But they'll tell law enforcement, I need more evidence. I need you to get more information. Doesn't work that way everywhere else. It's kind of the Crown and the law enforcement are separate. Law enforcement prepares a file, they hand it to the Crown argues it, and if they don't have enough information, they lose the case. Doesn't work that way here. It's a little bit different. So because you can work the investigation and look back and see the employee is accountable for more than what you caught them with, the amount goes up, and it's $2,500. So if 31% of the problem is employees, and that's the amount, that's over 500,000 incidents of internal theft undetected. These are people that are likely still working in retail today. These are the challenges. I'm going to go over them quickly because I know that you know this. It's a frustration that you have, otherwise you wouldn't be here. The frustration is police response. I get a case and they're either taking too long, or I know that there's a theft and the guy's in front of me and I know that he's on drugs and I don't want to stop him, and the police say, yeah, we'll be there in about 3 hours, or we're not coming. The diversion programs are a problem. So once you even catch the person and the police prosecute, they get diverted from the criminal court system. Not something that you are probably aware of on a regular basis, but that happens after you prosecute. So that's a problem from an industry standpoint. The loss prevention professionals, they're looking at that saying all of this hard work and you're going to let this person off with an apology letter, especially if they're an employee and they stole $20,000. They're going to write a letter of apology to the store manager and that's it, no criminal record. Unfortunately, that's the case. Prosecution is always a problem. Because the diversion program is in place, police come and they go, I'm not going to prosecute this because it's going to get bumped from the court system. And there's a reason that all of this is happening. And without boring you in too much detail, around 1990, there was a case that was heard before the Supreme Court, Askoff. And he was up on murder charges, but he took so long to get heard in criminal court that he said, I'm going to use my Charter of Rights and Freedoms argument and say it took too long to prosecute me. Brought it to the Supreme Court. They said, yeah, it's too long. So they actually dismissed the criminal charges, and it was called the Askoff decision. And the Askoff decision caused the courts this domino theory that, okay, well, if I have all these shoplifting cases that are before the courts, and I have a robbery, an assault, a sexual assault, a murder that's waiting in the wings, I have to dismiss all these so I can get these things through quickly, because otherwise they'll argue Askoff. It's case law. They'll just say it's an Askoff argument, and they'll get the case dismissed. So at the risk of losing these cases, all of these shoplifting cases got dismissed. And we have been living for decades with this same Askoff decision, and that's what's happening. Is the diversion program in Canada was put in place because of the Askoff decision to say, take these shoplifters, move them over so I can get the assault. That's the reality of what's happened. And that's why cases don't get prosecuted. Restorative justice is something that we are experimenting with shoplifters. We're going to be doing a pilot in Peel Region. There's a bunch of different communities that have asked for us to be involved. Nanaimo, Peterborough, a few others have called and said we want it here. The way that it works for restorative justice is, instead of saying civil remedy or criminal prosecution, we're going the oldest law in Canada, the restorative justice healing circles, to where we're giving education to first-time non-violent adult offenders. And that's what restorative justice is. You'll hear more about that. So sentencing guidelines, criminal code, catch and release, counterfeit markets, these are all challenges that we're facing in the industry. But let's just talk about customer theft. So they say, there's no silver bullet. And I just want to explain how customer theft, so why people steal. So they steal for need, greed, and opportunity. Retailers can't really do anything about need. Need is more of a social issue, more of an individual issue with the customer. Can't do anything about greed. Greed is, it's peer pressure and it's social media and the shrinking world, because the internet will tell you what people in the UK are wearing today, and so the fashion trends they don't delay 6 months or 1 year. They're immediate now. Everything is immediate. So you want what other people have, and you know what other people have because you can see it immediately. So there's not a lot we could do with greed. Opportunity is different. Being able to get something for nothing or for little risk without the fear of exposure. Explain that in just a minute. So 1 in 10 people, you've probably seen these statistics before, 1 in 10 people are honest. And by honest, I mean there's black and white, there's no gray. They live their life set by the rules. You may look at them and say, well, they're stubborn sometimes, they're very rigid in the way that they do things, but that's the reality. 1 in 10 people are honest. 1 in 10 people are dishonest. They're criminal element. They don't consider the rules, the black and white. Everything to them is gray, and I can do it. This is my decision and nobody else, and if I want something, I'm going to go take it. So 1 in 10 people are dishonest. 8 in 10 people live in the middle, and a lot of times when we present these numbers, people say, well, I'm on the honest side. Fair enough. Probably in this room, 1 in 10 of us is on that honest side. 1 in 10 of another room is on the dishonest side, not this room, because we work in retail. And then 8 in 10, let me explain it for a minute, because I'm going to put myself in that category. When you think about the honesty piece, and this is the challenge, these are the customers that are walking through your stores every day, and you have to understand this, is if 80% of the population is in that gray area and evaluates risk-reward, that means, I'll use the 401 as an argument because that's where I live. On the 401, I will tell you I drive between 125 and 135 kilometers an hour. And the posted speed limit, that is a black and white limit, is 100. And I will not travel 100. Why? Because I want to keep up with traffic flow, because I want to get somewhere quickly. All of the arguments that I know 80% of the population is with me. They're traveling at the same speed as me. And then every once in a while, someone just whips by on the soft shoulder, and they're the 1 in 10 that are dishonest, in my opinion. And then every once in a while, you come up against somebody who's doing 100 in the fast lane, that fast lane. And what do? Flick your high beams or do something because you're annoyed with them. And they're going, I'm just following the rules, man. It's 100 kilometers an hour, and that's what I'm doing. So this is what you're dealing with. And this is what you have to understand, that those same people will look at that because those same people, when they see a police car, they'll slam the brakes on. That's what happens. Red lights everywhere when the police car is sitting on the soft shoulder. Well, what happens in retail is the same type of thing. And people will look at it, and there's this threshold somewhere where you think, okay, how much bad will you actually do, where you rationalize the behavior, same behavior I rationalized by speeding. At what point am I going to look at it and say, I will do this, but I won't do that? And in a lot of cases, when people walk into a store, and I'm going to use a large department store like a Walmart because I spent 15 years there, and just explain what the environment is. The environment that you walk in is like there's nobody around anywhere, and there's all of this fun, neat stuff. And if you look at that and you think the risk-reward piece is that I won't get caught because there's no one around, I don't see cameras, I don't, and you're living in that gray area that spills over to the theft part because it's a big organization, there's no face to it, there's no name to it, it's a big 4-wall building. There's just too many people out there that will consider stealing, and that's what we're up against. So when you look at that, you say consideration, rationalization, and no fear of exposure is going to give me that opportunity, and 1 in 10 or 8 in 10 people are sitting on the fence and might take that chance. Now you look at it and say, well, what do I have to do to put something in place? So fear of exposure is probably the number one deterrent because they have no fear of exposure, so you have to put it in place. There has to be some kind of a physical deterrent. And so we've asked shoplifters this question, professional shoplifters who steal a lot. What would it take for you to stop? And they say, well, to stop in certain stores, it'll take a lot. To stop in this store or that store, and they name them. They say, I won't steal in those stores. Why? Because of the customer service. They're all over me. They're commission. They're whatever. They acknowledge me. And so if you can walk around anonymously, and the same example I use for 10 people, if there were 10 of us in the room, So if I turn the lights out and I put $100 on the stage and I said, if someone takes the $100, you'll never be identified. No one will ever know. So 1 in 10 people, as we talked about, will sit there and think about, whatever show they're going to watch tonight, because they're the 1 in 10 honest and they won't even consider. And then 8 in 10 will think about it and say, wait a minute, he said I won't be recognized. I could get away with it, and it's $100. I could be $100 richer. And so all of these things go through your mind. And then 1 in 10 will steal it even when I turn the lights on. Not 10 of us, but 10 other people. So that's the way it works. And if that's the way it works, and the fear of exposure, what is that fear of exposure? It's eye contact with somebody. It's being able to acknowledge and recognize all of your customers as they walk through. And if you don't have the resources and you're only one person and you have 3 customers, you can still acknowledge 3 customers with eye contact. Eye contact is the #1 deterrent for anybody to steal. It's eye contact and customer acknowledgement. So the solution to most customer theft is aggressive hospitality. There's your silver bullet. That's the bottom line. CPTED is crime prevention through environmental design. It's looking at a building and saying, we're going to design it a certain way so that criminals can't steal from me and not get away with it. I walked into a store called Sonic Boom in Toronto, and they wanted to engage my services. And I said 2 things. #1, I'm going to tell you to hire a loss prevention department, but you can't. You can't afford it. I'm going to give you my fee, but with the reality of what you're losing versus what I'm going to spending a lot of time in your store, that in itself would be a loss. So don't do that. Don't engage my service. And I was kind of shooting myself in the foot, and I've done this many, many times with independent businesses, and said, I'll just walk through your store for an hour, no charge, and just listen to me, and I'll put in place something that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. So Sonic Boom. One of the things that he talked about was teenagers that come into the store and they're milling around and stuff, and he thinks that this is he sells old records and CDs and 4-track cassette tapes, 8 tracks, that type of thing. It's a music store. And he had a couple of chairs set up and he had a cash register over on the side. And I said, well, move your cash register over to the middle, first of all, because the way you walk into the store is it's a main aisle, and then you go downstairs and you go upstairs, and the cash register is way over here. So put the cash register in the aisle. And then take these 2 chairs, because he had these 2 chairs that were actually for sale. Buy a cheap guitar, $150, and put it there with the 2 chairs. And when these kids come in, and they're all musicians, they all kind of like they're having fun. So when they're loitering, give them a guitar so that they can loiter and play the guitar at the same time. What this does is it gives that visible deterrent as somebody is walking in, so that there's activity at the front door. When there's activity at the front door, people will reconsider doing something. It's when they have easy access and nobody is going to acknowledge them when they come in and out. You don't have to have a physical barrier. You have to have some kind of entertainment, some kind of something, a POS system or something, to where that customer can't walk out without that risk, that fear of acknowledgement or exposure, so they see something. And 2 kids playing a guitar at the door, you're going to walk in and then you're going to consider, I got to walk past those 2 kids, and I actually don't know. Maybe they're 18, 19, maybe they're security, I don't know. You question all this stuff. So as you're questioning this stuff, the rationale goes down, the fear of exposure goes up, the risk-reward changes, and people will not steal from you. Which is why Walmart's success, and I'll give you some numbers that they're a little bit staggering. I can't give you confidential numbers, but when I left Walmart, before I left Walmart, I had argued for 5 years to keep greeters. And people were always saying, what's the value of a greeter? I mean, it's an old man or an old lady standing at the door. Most of the times they're not even acknowledging the customer. They're like looking at kids and putting sticky faces on their hand and doing this type of thing. And I said, they're very valuable to the organization because they're that physical deterrent. They're that aggressive hospitality in some cases, but they raise the question in the person's mind as to whether or not that same greeter is going to be there as I walk out. Because if they see me walking in and then they see me walking out and I have a jacket full of stuff, there's that fear of exposure. So Walmart removed greeters, and when Walmart removed greeters, they didn't know the value of the benefit of a greeter, but they knew that it was detrimental to remove the greeters because their shrink went up, their losses went up. I can't tell you by how much, but they went up by multi-millions of dollars. And I'm not exaggerating like Trump does, it really did go up multi-millions of dollars. So customer service. Now, in terms of employees, how do I keep my employees from stealing from me? So getting the right employee or getting the right team, it's a 3-step process. Find the right person, onboard them the right way, and treat them right. And I'll explain this. Finding the right person is not about taking the best applicant for the job. If you have 5 applicants for the job, and you know, here's my job, and here's their qualifications, and they match 80%, they're not right. So wait it out. Find the right person. Be patient. Don't just put a warm body in. Find somebody who's going to share in the culture of your business, the culture of your store, somebody who is going to fill a gap. If you're looking at a total team and you're missing one element, then maybe that's a very friendly person. Wait till the very friendly person comes in. So find the right person. Make sure you do a criminal background check on that person. Make sure you do a reference check on that person. So now they're a good match, onboard them the right way. One of the biggest downfalls that a retailer has when they're onboarding somebody is they wait to see if they're going to work out before they start to train them. So they'll wait 2 weeks before they introduce the training for the person instead of training them and making them successful for the job. So these are things that people have done wrong. Doesn't mean that you've done that wrong. But in a lot of cases, what they want to do is make sure they work out before I invest in their training and development. And that's a big problem in the industry, is that we do that because we want to save time. We think we want to save expenses because we want to make sure they work out. They'll work out if you train them day one. And then the other piece is about treating them right. And treating them right is something that's been proven over and over again. I wrote something about the Hawthorne effect. For those of you who are not familiar, 1921, there was a study that was done in Chicago on a factory where they turned the lights up to see productivity. Does productivity improve? And they found that productivity improved when the lights were turned up. And when the lights were turned back down, what do you think happened? Productivity go up? Down? It went up. Then they changed the heating in the building and they made it warmer. And productivity went up. They made it cooler. Productivity went up. Everything they did resulted in an increase in productivity. Then in the 50s, somebody studied this and said, what happened in Hawthorne? And what they found is that it wasn't necessarily the physical environmental changes to the building. It was the fact that the employee felt recognized. They felt that management, that somebody was doing something for me, whether it was warm, whether it was cold, it didn't matter. And so that's called the Hawthorne effect. And that's something that led into a lot of companies who have been measuring level of engagement. And level of engagement is the emotional connection and attachment that I have to an organization in their success. And how you get engagement and how you increase the level of engagement is by treating your people right. And so the argument in this case is that they're working on your behalf, so they're not stealing while you're not watching. They're working as part of your team. So engagement is the silver bullet there. So I don't have a whole lot of time. I'm gonna open it up for questions, but I'm not even halfway through the presentation. But I do want to talk about a few things. For an LP program, you can integrate, so you can have a loss prevention service. You can have a third party, so you can call people in to do that for you if it's security guards at your doors or if it's an investigator doing plainclothes floor walking. Or you can work on an ad hoc basis where you call people in only when you have a problem. Those are 3. And then as a standard LP program, you might have a mix of this, but an alarm system for burglars is a must. CCTV. I've never seen more security cameras in Canada, and I've been coming to all of the cities for a very long time. Never seen more security cameras than I have in Vancouver. You have more security cameras per capita than I've ever seen anywhere. Even your construction sites now have this remote camera system that has about 30 cameras on it, which I think is a brilliant idea. And I've never seen that before. I saw it last night for the first time. But I thought, that was pretty impressive. Video analytics comes from the cameras. So if you have cameras and you have a recording device, you're probably using about 15% of the total capacity of your system. If you've purchased any type of video from your camera provider, it can probably do more things for you. And I'll give you an example. Video analytics is about looking at the pixels and the video image and seeing if things change, seeing if there's long dwell times in certain areas. So if I have a blocked fire exit, from a health and safety standpoint, this is brilliant. Get a blocked fire exit. I can actually program my existing video system so that I know if merchandise sits in front of the fire exit for 3 minutes or more, and then it'll register an alarm, and in some cases it can register an alarm and trigger it right to your cell phone so you can see and go, oh, my fire exit's blocked. I better have somebody move that pallet. The same thing can happen when shoplifters or when groups of people are congregating in a certain area. If you've got a locked cabinet or showcase, it's going to take a while to get into that. If you've got somebody or a group of people who are standing there for a lot of time, it can trigger an alarm and say that there might be a potential problem there. Access control is a standard. IT systems and data analytics is about drilling down to all of the things that happen at POS and trying to figure out if there's anomalies or if there's trends that would represent a fraud in progress, an internal fraud in progress. So these are some thoughts, and I want to give you a couple of these examples. These are independent business owners and some comments, some things that they wrote to me, and I've just taken some of their quotes, and I want to talk about where the solutions are, because this is what you have to think. First of all, if you have shrink, if you don't know your shrink, you have to do an inventory and find that out, because it's going to be detrimental to your bottom line. It is easier to make a profit by reducing your shrink than it is by increasing your sales. I'll give you the calculation. If you have a 5% net profit, then every $100 you sell equals 5% to your net profit, which means every 20 you sell equals $1. If I lose $1, it is equivalent to $20 in sales, right? So if I lose that dollar, it takes me $20 to recover from it. I get no profitability from the $20. So if you look at this on a larger scale, for every $100 I lose, it's $2,000. How difficult is it to get $2,000 of incremental business to come into your store? Much more difficult than it is to control the $100. So if I can reduce my $100 loss, it's equivalent to increasing my sales by $2,000. That's the math, and that's why loss prevention, and that's why what my business is called Bottom Line Matters. It's because you can improve the profitability of your business so much more efficiently by controls, by putting standard operating practice in place and getting everybody to respect that, than it is to increase your top line. And when the environment is so competitive that even rules like cross-border shopping don't help me, it's so difficult to get that incremental sale. I have to make sure I optimize my bottom line first. So gloves and Olfa blades, they usually leave the packaging behind. This is a retailer that is getting ripped off like crazy. They're over 4% in this particular store, and they have a problem. They're leaving the packaging behind. And so if somebody is leaving the packaging behind, that's a tracks of a thief. And in terms of tracks of a thief, what you want to do is collect all of that information. The only good thing about they leave the packaging behind is that you now have the packaging. So you know where the area of concealment was. And if you see this and you're able to plot this in your store, if it's a small store, it's a lot easier. If it's a big store, you want to be able to collect all this information and put little pegs where all of this stuff is found, so that you can inform everybody, those engaged employees that work for you, and tell them, educate them that this back corner is a hot spot. It's where they're leaving the packaging. Here's another one, tools in general, hand tools, power tools, but really if we're honest with ourselves, it doesn't matter. People will steal anything, tied down or not. So you need to take anything into consideration where you have your thoughts from anybody who works for you to say, why do you think that we're losing this? And they'll say something, feed off of that, and try to figure out from the bandit standpoint, why is it that they had that opportunity? So a few things: show and tell, talk it up. Don't keep it a secret. If you put a security camera in and you have good visible images of your entire store, talk it up. Tell your employees that you have it. Make sure that these aren't concealed. Make sure they're cameras that people can see. Avoid the shoplifter checks, recognize instead. So this is a big thing, mostly related to the loss prevention staff. Don't look for shoplifters, you won't find them. Try to understand the behavior of customers, because when you start to understand customers, when a shoplifter comes in, you'll have that gut feeling, that thing that says this is different from those other things, and you'll be able to respond to that. Anytime you see anybody who you think has, if you're not in the business of arresting shoplifters, and I'll tell you, I used to do that, and if I was 18 again and had to face the criminals who are out there today, I probably wouldn't do the job. It's not safe. There's people who are carrying syringes and weapons, and they're fighters, and for whatever reason, you just want to think, why are you fighting? Like, seriously, nothing's going to happen to you in court anyways. So why are you fighting with me? Well, they might have other things on them, like weapons, like drugs, where they're going to get into bigger trouble. So you don't know this, and you don't want to question every time you arrest somebody. So it's a lot safer to go up to somebody and say, hey, I noticed you've been shopping around for the last 5 minutes and you might need help. Anything I can do for you? If you just took something 3 minutes ago, I've told you, I saw you take it. I'll give you the opportunity to dump it, but I've made that statement. What I haven't done is said to him, hey, I think you might have stolen something 3 minutes ago, because that'll cost me anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 in court if he chooses to sue me. Now, if he's a banker for TD, he might be close to somebody who recognizes him, and that is going to have an effect on his reputation, and now I've defamed his character, and I've done all kinds of other things. He'd probably sue me for $100,000 or more. So you have to understand that you can't treat people, you can't just say that you've done that, and you can't just accuse them of something. But you can say, I've noticed you in the last 10 minutes. You've told them that I probably saw you steal, so you should probably dump it. So a couple of things. So I do have a website. It's Bottom Line Matters, and I just talk about why I did this. Because of Retail West, the conference that Retail Council puts on in Vancouver, I think in September or October, I'm not sure. And because I've dealt with independent retailers, and through the last 5 years when I have been consulting, I've met a lot of independent retailers, and I understand, because I come from a family of independent retailers to a certain degree. They're IGA and Foodland, and they're franchise owners. So I'm a little bit sensitive to the fact that the big guys out there have the resources for loss prevention departments, and the mid-sized retailers, they have the resources for outsourcing every once in a while. And independent retailers, if they start to hire and engage loss prevention staff, that's going to essentially add to siphoning off of the bottom line. And so I started thinking about how do I get this information out, because there's very easy things. I'll give you an example of something in Victoria that I'm going to put on the website, and I'm going to explain. The website's not up and running yet. It will be. So it's called Bottom Line Matters, and it's subscription based, so that a retailer can go there, and for a fee of $395 a year, they can get access to what matters to the bottom line. So that's why it's Bottom Line Matters. In Victoria, the police have told the shopkeepers of Victoria to, as a deterrent for shoplifting, post the picture of the shoplifter at the front door. You're not allowed to do that. Now, police are experts in the police manual that corresponds with the Criminal Code of Canada. I'll explain that. So, Criminal Code of Canada could be ambiguous in some cases. It could say that you've committed theft if you have the intent to deprive someone temporarily or permanently of their property. Okay, so all of that, but the word in there, intent, well, that's ambiguous. What does that mean? That's arguable. You could go to court and you could argue that I didn't have the intent. I was trying to hide it. My wife was around. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you see selection, that you see concealment, that you maintain continuity, and that the person exits your store. Now, you've heard those rules before because most retailers put those rules in place to say don't stop someone until they have all of the elements. Those elements were created to respond to this ambiguous language of intent to deprive one of their property. So police manual is the same thing. It tells police, here's how you act. It references the Criminal Code of Canada. It is not a criminal offense to post a picture of a shoplifter at your front door. So the police say, do it. But what the police didn't say is, it is an offense under the Privacy Act of Canada, which I as a police officer do not enforce. It's an offense for you to take somebody's personal identifiable information, which is their image, that's already been argued to be PII, and post it on the door without consent. Because under the Privacy Act, you have to follow certain rules. You have to get explicit or implied consent of the individual, have stated purpose of that personal information, do all kinds of 10 guiding principles, and then you can do it. And no shoplifter will ever give you consent to put their picture on the front door. So you can't do it. But police say you can. When the person wants to challenge you, they go to the OPCC, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, and not to the police. And so you have to look at that and say, well, that's still a law. That's not enforced by police. It's enforced by the Privacy Commissioner. And so there's all kinds of guidelines around that. So that's one piece, and that's why this would be beneficial for retailers, that you're giving them the bottom line. You're just saying, well, what's the bottom line? What can I do? What shouldn't I do? What's going to work for me? What works for the larger retailers who have experienced this before, who have invested in the resource and technology? What's the bottom line that's going to make me more profitable? And then there's an LP event that takes place through Retail Council of Canada. There's about 325 people. We typically get response from across the country for delegates at that event. It's primarily for loss prevention professionals. Anybody can register, but primarily it's for a loss prevention professional because they're going to be talking about things like video analytics and data analytics, some things that are maybe not affordable for an independent business right now. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out this morning.